The Battle of Mons was the first major action of the British Expeditionary Force in World War I. At Mons, the British Army attempted to hold the line of the Mons-Condé Canal against the advancing German First Army. Although the British fought well and inflicted disproportionate casualties on the numerically superior Germans, they were eventually forced to retreat due both to the greater strength of numbers of the Germans and the sudden retreat of the French Fifth Army, which exposed their right flank. Though initially planned as a simple tactical withdrawal and executed in good order, the British retreat from Mons lasted for 2 weeks, and it is there where the story takes a supernatural turn. So what happened at the retreat of Mons? Whom did the soldiers say saved their lives? And what does the evidence show? Let's try and find out. Heavily outnumbered by the Germans and suffering an unsustainable casualty rate, British units were forced to retreat on the 24th of August, 1914. Many of the men had reached the end of their endurance. Some had not eaten in 24 hours. Still, they slogged on. A British division commander, with tears in his eyes, paid them the ultimate compliment. The Germans may be able to kill them, but by God, they can't beat them. But the Germans were coming with such overwhelming numbers that rifles and courage could not hold them any longer. It was then, in the time of deadly crisis, that the angels of Mons began to appear. In one action during the long retreat, an understrength British battalion, about to be overrun by masses of German infantry, became aware of the shadowy army fighting beside them, an army of bowmen. These phantom men-at-arms cried aloud to St. George, and their swift arrows darkened the sky. A great voice was heard to thunder over the din of battle. German prisoners taken into the action said they were bewildered that their opponents had reverted back to wearing armor and shooting arrows. Similar tales of such battlefield visions occurred in medieval and ancient warfare. It seemed that when news of atrocity reports like the rape of Belgium and that of the crucified soldier paved the way for a belief that God would intervene directly against such an evil enemy. In another account, on the night of the 26th, the third day of the retreat west through Belgium, weary British soldiers saw tall, unearthly figures materialize in the gloom above the German lines. They were winged like angels, and as they hovered in the gathering darkness, the Germans inexplicably halted and the British slipped away to safety. During the retreat, some soldiers swore that they had seen the face of the patron saint of England, St. George. A wounded Lancashire Fusilier asked the nurse for a picture or medal of St. George. He described the saint the same way it was pictured on the medal, a tall, yellow-haired man on a white horse, wearing golden armor and wielding a sword. Other soldiers agreed that he looked just like his image on the golden sovereigns of the day. In another account, one Lance Corporal told his nurse of the appearance of angels during the Mons retreat. He could see, he said, quite plainly in midair a strange light which seemed to be quite distinctly outlined and was not a reflection of the moon, nor were there any clouds. The light became brighter, and I could quite see distinctly 3 shapes, one in the center having looked like outspread wings. The other 2 were not so large, but quite plainly distinct from the center one. They were above the German line facing us. We stood watching them for about 3/4 of an hour. All the men with me saw them. I have a record of 15 years good service, and I should be very sorry to make a fool of myself by telling a story merely to please anyone. Yet another account, as told by Harold Begbie, a writer on the supernatural, who related this tale in his 1916 book, On the Side of Angels. Begbie interviewed a soldier who spoke of a bright light in the sky, and the soldier in question was a Grenadiers Guards NCO, hardly a type given to hysteria and delusion. The accounts of heavenly aid soon abounded in Britain. The magazine Light ran a story entitled The Invisible Allies in October of 1914, and followed up another column the next April reporting that during the retreat of Mons, several officers and men had seen a supernatural cloud between them and the Germans. The Catholic paper, The Universe, reported an account from a Catholic officer in which an isolated British party decided to charge the enemy head-on. Running into the open, somebody yelled, St. George for England in the good old style. And all around the British appeared a spectral company of archers. The British overtook the German trench, and a German prisoner later asked the officer who the officer on the great white horse had been, for the German riflemen had not been able to hit him. Captain Hayward, an intelligence officer with the British I Corps, referred to the Angel of Mons as 4 or 5 wonderful beings, robed in white, who faced the German lines in a brilliant sunlight, with hands upraised to halt the advancing enemy. He further referred to another occasion on which the sky opened with a bright light and figures of luminous beings appeared. By May of 1915, a full-blown controversy was erupting, with the angels being used as proof of action of divine providence on the sides of the Allies in sermons all across Britain and spreading into newspaper reports widely published across the world. These new publications included popular songs and artist renderings of the angels. There were more reports of angels and apparitions from the front, including even Joan of Arc. In a time of intense media interest, many of these reports allegedly confirming sightings of supernatural activity were actually secondhand, and some of them were hoaxes created by soldiers who were not even at Mons. A careful investigation by the Society of Psychical Research in 1915 said of the first-hand testimony, "We have received none at all, and of the second-hand, we have none that would justify us in assuming the occurrence of any supernatural phenomenon." The Society for Psychical Research went on to say the stories relating to battlefield visions were circulated during the spring and summer of 1915 prove on investigation to be founded on mere rumor and cannot be traced back to any authoritative source. Given that the Society of Psychical Research believed in the existence of supernatural forces, the conclusions of this report are highly significant. The latest and most detailed examination of the Mons story by David Clark suggests that these men have been part of a covert attempt by military intelligence to spread morale-boosting propaganda and disinformation. As it was a time of Allied problems, with the Lusitania sinking, the Zeppelin attacks, and failure to achieve a breakthrough on the Western Front, the timing would make military sense. Also, some of the stories conveniently claimed that the sources cannot be revealed for security reasons. And since during the retreat many troops were exhausted and had not slept properly for days, could such visions be hallucinations? According to the conclusion of the most detailed study of the event, it seemed that the stories themselves certainly boosted morale on the home front, as popular enthusiasm for the war was dying down in 1915, and they demonstrated the usefulness of religion in wartime. After the war, the stories continued to be frequently repeated. One of the most substantial pieces of evidence that is known to exist comes from Brigadier General John Charteris's memoir published in 1931, which stated, "An angel of the Lord, clad in white raiment, bearing a flaming sword, appeared before the German forces at Mons battle, forbidding their advance." However, General Charteris wasn't serving with the Second Corps in 1914, and was commenting on it therefore from a second-hand perspective, and an examination of his original war correspondence and notes from which his book's text was drawn makes no contemporary mention of the story at that time. It would appear likely that he retrospectively added it into the book narrative when writing it post-war. Those who scoffed at the tales of St. George, angels, and phantom bowmen were quick to point out that it was difficult to obtain first-hand authenticated evidence, which was certainly true. So then, what inspired the stories of angels, spectral archers, and the mighty figure of St. George? Was it hysteria, fatigue, or fear? Perhaps, but it is worth remembering that the men who told these stories, however exhausted, were tough, experienced soldiers used to such hardships, and a great many of them saw identical sights at different times and in different places. Maybe some of the stories were invented, maybe all those who said they saw a miracle were simply hallucinating. Maybe it was, after all, merely mass hysteria, but maybe it wasn't. Let us know your thoughts in the comments.